Listen, I have been working as a planetary surveyor for the Galactic Mapping Initiative for roughly 70 standard years now. In that time, I have cataloged over 4,000 worlds, toxic atmospheres, crushing gravity wells, radiation-soaked hellscapes, you name it. I have probably stuck a sensor probe into it and filed the appropriate paperwork, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sheer audacity of what humans consider acceptable living conditions. Vorthak here, and I need you to understand something before I continue. The dead zone is not called that because it sounds dramatic. It is called that because everything dies there. Every single thing. We are talking about a region of space where stellar radiation, exotic particle decay, and gravitational anomalies combine to create conditions that would shred most known forms of matter at the molecular level. Ships do not go there. Probes do not return from there. The entire area is marked with every possible warning designation in 17 different languages, including 3 that are specifically reserved for describing ways the universe can kill you that most species have not even imagined yet. So when my supervisor, a thoroughly unpleasant Gorthian named Brakthar, called me into his office and told me I needed to investigate reports of unauthorized construction in the dead zone, my first response was to check if he had been drinking fermented plasma again. He had not. He was completely serious. And according to our long-range sensors, something was definitely out there. Something big. Something that, according to all known laws of physics and basic common sense, should not exist. The briefing took approximately 15 minutes, during which Brakthar showed me sensor readings that made no sense whatsoever. Thermal signatures indicating active habitation, electromagnetic emissions suggesting power generation, atmospheric containment fields operating at full capacity. All of this happening in a region where the background radiation alone should sterilize anything organic within seconds. Who is insane enough to build in the dead zone? I asked, already knowing I was going to hate the answer. Brakthar pulled up a file on his display, and sure enough, there it was. The species designation that had been causing problems across the galaxy for the past 20 years. Humans. Of course it was humans. They claimed it was for recreational purposes, Brakthar said, and I swear his voice had the tone of someone who had given up trying to understand anything anymore. The initial permit application listed it as a vacation residence. I stared at him. Then I stared at the sensor readings showing what was clearly a massive structure sitting in the middle of the most hostile environment in known space. Then I stared back at him. They built a vacation home in the dead zone, I said slowly, just to make sure I had heard correctly. Apparently so. The same dead zone that we use as a standard reference for uninhabitable space. The very same. The place where we lost 3 research vessels just trying to get close enough to take measurements. Yes, Vorthak, that dead zone. Now stop asking stupid questions and go investigate. Take the survey ship and find out what the humans are doing out there. And for the love of the cosmic spiral, try not to get yourself killed. The paperwork for surveyor fatalities is absolutely ridiculous. 2 days later, I was aboard the survey vessel Persistent Observer, heading toward coordinates that every navigation system I own marked as certain death. My co-pilot, a young Threxian named Quillix, kept checking the radiation shielding status every 30 seconds like it was going to change. The shields are rated for this, right? Quillix asked for the 11th time. According to specifications, yes. According to reality, we are about to find out. That is not reassuring, Senior Surveyor Vorthak. No, but it is honest. The closer we got to the dead zone boundary, the worse the readings became. Radiation levels climbed into ranges that would kill most organic life in under an hour. Gravitational fluctuations made navigation a nightmare. And then there was the exotic particle count, which was so far beyond normal parameters that our sensors actually stopped displaying numbers and just showed a flashing warning symbol that looked like a screaming face. I am detecting a structure, Quillix announced, his voice climbing an octave higher than usual. Bearing 047, distance approximately 8,000 kilometers. I pulled up the scan results and felt my stomach drop. Because there it was, a habitat, a massive, sprawling habitat sitting right in the middle of the dead zone, like it had every right to be there. Multiple levels, transparent dome sections, what appeared to be gardens or green spaces, and enough shielding to protect a small battle station. Are those solar collectors? Quillix asked, pointing at arrays extending from the main structure. I think so, yes. But the radiation here would fry solar collectors in minutes. Apparently, not these ones. We moved closer, every alarm system on the ship screaming warnings about unsafe conditions and imminent structural failure. Except the structure ahead of us looked fine. Better than fine, actually. It looked comfortable, welcoming even, like someone had decided that the most dangerous region of known space just needed some proper landscaping and decent architecture to become prime real estate. I am receiving a communication signal, Quillix said, sounding surprised that our communications array had not melted yet. Put it through. The voice that came over the speaker was human, female, and entirely too cheerful for someone living in an environment that should have killed her several times over. Good afternoon. This is Margaret speaking. You must be the surveyors from the Galactic Mapping Initiative. We have been expecting you. Please proceed to Docking Bay 2 and mind the gravitational eddies on approach. They can be a bit tricky if you are not used to them. Quillix looked at me. I looked at Quillix. Neither of us said anything because what exactly do you say when someone welcomes you to their death trap vacation home like they are inviting you over for tea? I managed to pilot the persistent observer through the gravitational eddies, which were not just tricky but actively trying to tear my ship apart, and settled into Docking Bay 2. The bay itself was pressurized, temperature-controlled, and according to my instruments, completely safe for organic life, which should have been impossible, but at this point I was willing to accept that humans operated on different rules than the rest of the universe. The airlock cycled open, and Margaret was there, waiting for us. Human female, probably somewhere in her 40s by their standard aging metrics, wearing casual clothing that would have been appropriate for a garden party and completely inappropriate for the hellscape outside the habitat walls. Welcome to Haven Point, she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. I am so glad you made it safely. The dead zone can be a bit intimidating for first-time visitors, but I promise it is not as bad as it looks. Not as bad as it looks. The woman was standing in the middle of a region that the entire galaxy had written off as completely uninhabitable, and she was telling me it was not as bad as it looks. I shook her hand because refusing seemed rude, and also because I was genuinely curious if she was actually real or some kind of radiation-induced hallucination. Senior Surveyor Vorthak here, I managed to say. This is Junior Surveyor Quillix. We are here to investigate reports of unauthorized construction in a restricted zone. Oh yes, the permits. Bit of a mess, that whole situation. Come on inside and we can discuss it properly. I just made fresh lemonade. She turned and walked deeper into the habitat, like this was the most natural thing in the world, leaving Quillix and me standing in the docking bay, trying to process what was happening. Did she just offer us lemonade? Quillix whispered. I believe she did, yes. In the dead zone? Apparently so. We followed Margaret through corridors that were bright, clean, and decorated with what appeared to be actual plants. Living plants, growing in soil, with leaves and everything. In the dead zone, where plants should have withered into radioactive dust approximately 3 seconds after being exposed to the local conditions. The main living area was even more absurd. Large windows, and I mean floor-to-ceiling transparent panels, looking out at the swirling chaos of the dead zone. Comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings, artwork on the walls, a kitchen area where something was cooking that actually smelled good, and in the center of it all, a table set with glasses and a pitcher of what I assumed was the promised lemonade. Please sit down, Margaret said, gesturing to chairs that looked far too comfortable for a habitat in hostile space. I know this must all seem a bit unusual. Unusual, I repeated, sitting down mostly because my legs were not entirely sure they wanted to keep supporting my weight. That is one way to describe it. Margaret poured lemonade into glasses with ice cubes. Actual ice cubes, made from frozen water, in the dead zone. I suppose you want to know why we built here, she said, settling into her own chair and taking a sip of lemonade, like we were having a pleasant afternoon chat, instead of sitting in the middle of the most dangerous location in the sector. That would be helpful, yes. Well, it started about 5 years ago. My husband Thomas and we were looking for a retirement property, somewhere quiet, away from the usual traffic lanes with good views and minimal neighbors. We are both retired astrophysicists, you see, so we wanted something with scientific interest as well. Quillix made a choking sound that he tried to cover as a cough. You chose the dead zone for your retirement home, I said, just to confirm I was understanding correctly. Oh, we did not choose it right away. We looked at several locations. That nice nebula cluster in the Traxian sector, a few planetary systems with interesting geological features, even considered one of those artificial habitats near the trading hub at Center Station. But none of them really spoke to us, you know? No, I did not know because normal people looking for retirement homes did not compare nebula clusters to regions of space marked as instant death hazards. Then we stumbled across the dead zone data, Margaret continued, warming to her subject. And Thomas said, now that is interesting. Look at those exotic particle readings. Look at that gravitational distortion. Do you know how rare it is to find that combination of phenomena occurring naturally? I was under the impression it is rare because it kills everything, I said. Well, yes, if you do not shield properly. But that is just an engineering problem. We consulted with some friends back on Earth, folks who had worked on extreme environment habitats, and they assured us it was completely doable with the right materials and design. Completely doable. Building a habitat in the dead zone was completely doable. I wanted to ask what kind of materials could possibly protect against the conditions outside, but I was afraid the answer would just make me more confused. So we filed the permit applications, Margaret went on, submitted all the proper documentation, environmental impact studies, safety assessments, structural engineering reports, everything by the book. And then we waited. I reviewed the record, I said carefully. Your permit applications were denied. 17 times. Yes, that was frustrating. Lots of automated rejections, citing safety regulations and zoning restrictions. We kept resubmitting with updated data showing our shielding specifications and redundant safety systems. But every time it got flagged as inappropriate construction in a hazard zone. Because it is a hazard zone, Quillix interjected, speaking for the first time since we entered the habitat. Margaret smiled at him kindly. Oh, sweetie, everywhere is a hazard zone if you think about it hard enough. Earth has hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and occasionally asteroids that try to cause extinction events. We still live there. It is all about proper preparation and good engineering. I was beginning to understand why the permit applications had been rejected so many times. The humans had not been deterred by the rejections. They had seen them as a bureaucratic inconvenience rather than the universe trying to tell them they were about to do something monumentally stupid. So after the 17th rejection, Margaret continued, Thomas said, forget it, we will just build it anyway and sort out the permits later, which I know sounds irresponsible, but we really did follow all safety protocols during construction. Probably more safety protocols than strictly necessary, honestly. You built this entire habitat without authorization, I said, trying to keep my voice level. We built it without final permit approval, yes. But we had all the technical certifications, purchased all the materials through legitimate channels, hired proper construction contractors, the whole thing. It just would have taken another 5 years to get the Galactic Mapping Initiative to actually process our applications, and we are not getting any younger. Thomas chose that moment to enter the living area. Human male, similar age to Margaret, wearing what appeared to be gardening clothes and carrying a basket of vegetables. Honey, we have guests, Margaret called out cheerfully. Oh, wonderful. Are these the surveyors? Hello, hello. Welcome to Haven Point. Sorry about the mess. I have been working in the hydroponics bay. He set down the basket, which I now saw contained actual fresh vegetables, and came over to shake hands with the same casual friendliness his wife had displayed. Thomas, they are asking about the permits, Margaret said. Ah, yes, the permits. Bit of a sticky situation, that. Can I offer you anything? We have fresh tomatoes, cucumbers, some lovely lettuce. Margaret makes an excellent salad. You grow your own food? Quillix asked, sounding like his brain was actively refusing to process this information. Of course. Hydroponics bay on level 3. We have got tomatoes, peppers, several varieties of lettuce, herbs, strawberries, even tried growing potatoes, but they did not take well to the radiation shielding adjustments. Still working on those. Do you folks like gardening? I decided to regain control of this conversation before it devolved further into discussions of agricultural practices in lethal space environments. Let me make sure I understand the situation, I said, setting down my lemonade glass. You two retired astrophysicists decided to build a retirement home in the most dangerous region of known space. When your permit applications were repeatedly denied, you built it anyway. And now you are growing vegetables and making lemonade while sitting in the middle of conditions that should have killed you instantly. That is a fairly accurate summary, yes, Thomas agreed. Though to be fair, the conditions do not kill you instantly. More like over the course of several minutes if your shielding fails. We have got triple redundant systems specifically to prevent that scenario. Triple redundant systems, I repeated. Well, you cannot be too careful. The primary shielding is a multi-layer composite using human-manufactured alloys that we developed specifically for this project. Secondary shielding is an electromagnetic field matrix that deflects charged particles. Tertiary shielding is a gravity well generator that literally bends space around the habitat to redirect the worst of the exotic particle streams. Plus, we have got sensor arrays monitoring everything constantly and automated emergency protocols if anything starts failing. He said this like it was completely normal to engineer solutions to problems that had stumped the entire galactic scientific community for centuries. How did you develop shielding materials that can withstand these conditions, Warren, I asked, because this was actually important information. If humans had genuinely solved the dead zone shielding problem, that had implications far beyond their questionable real estate choices. Thomas and Margaret exchanged glances, and I saw something pass between them. Not quite embarrassment, but perhaps awareness that they were about to reveal something significant. Well, Thomas began slowly, humans have a bit of a history with figuring out how to survive in places we probably should not be. It is kind of our thing. When we first started exploring our own solar system, people said we could not possibly survive on Mars. Too cold, no atmosphere, radiation from space. We built habitats there anyway. Then they said we could not build stations near Jupiter because of the radiation belts. We built them anyway. There is a pattern here. You keep building things in places that should kill you, I said. Exactly. And every time we do it, we learn something new about engineering, materials science, energy management, all sorts of useful fields. By the time we joined the galactic community, we had already spent about 200 years figuring out how to live in increasingly hostile environments. The dead zone was just the next logical challenge. Logical? There was nothing logical about this. But I was beginning to understand the fundamental disconnect between human thinking and, well, everyone else's thinking. Let me show you the shielding systems, Margaret offered, standing up. I think it will make more sense when you see the actual setup. Plus, the observation deck has absolutely stunning views of the particle storms. They are especially beautiful this time of cycle. She led us through the habitat, pointing out features with obvious pride. The hydroponics bay that Thomas had mentioned, where rows of plants grew under specialized lighting. The power generation system that somehow converted the deadly radiation outside into usable energy. The water reclamation facility that was apparently more efficient than most planetary systems. Every single component designed to not just survive in the dead zone, but to thrive there. The observation deck was exactly what Margaret had promised. Floor-to-ceiling transparent panels, which Thomas explained were actually 18 layers of different materials, each serving specific protective functions, looking out at a view that was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Swirls of exotic particles created luminous patterns and colors I did not have names for. Gravitational distortions bent light into impossible shapes. And somewhere in the distance, the radiation storms that had destroyed 3 research vessels danced across space like cosmic aurora displays. This is the view that sold us on the location, Margaret said softly, standing next to the window with an expression of genuine contentment. You cannot get this anywhere else in the galaxy. Every day it is different. Every day there is something new to see, worth every bit of trouble with the permits. I stood there looking out at the chaos, trying to reconcile my professional understanding of how deadly this environment was with the fact that 2 elderly humans had turned it into their retirement paradise. The shielding specifications, I said, dragging my attention back to the practical matters. I will need copies for my report. Complete technical documentation, material compositions, energy requirements, everything. Of course, Thomas said. I will transfer all the files to your ship's computer. We documented everything during construction. Actually published a few papers on the shielding technology in human scientific journals. Sharing knowledge and all that. And the unauthorized construction, I pressed, that is still a violation of galactic regulations, regardless of your safety systems. Margaret sighed. Yes, we know. We are prepared to pay whatever fines are necessary and go through the proper permit process retroactively. We just ask that we be allowed to stay here while the bureaucracy sorts itself out. This is our home now. We really do not want to leave. There was something in her voice when she said that. Not pleading exactly, but a quiet determination. These humans had built their dream retirement home in literally the worst possible location, had overcome engineering challenges that should have been impossible, and had created something genuinely remarkable. And now they were asking permission to keep it. I thought about my options. I could recommend immediate evacuation and habitat dismantling, which was probably the technically correct response according to regulations. I could recommend massive fines and restrictions, or I could recognize that sometimes the universe gives you situations that do not fit neatly into existing bureaucratic categories. I will need several days to complete a full survey, I said finally. Inspect all systems, verify safety claims, document everything properly. If, and this is a significant if, everything checks out to specifications, I will recommend that your permit applications be reconsidered with full technical data included. Thomas smiled broadly. That is all we ask. Fair evaluation based on actual facts rather than assumptions about what is possible. However, I continued, if I find any safety violations, any systems operating outside acceptable parameters, any indication that this habitat poses a danger to yourselves or others, I will recommend immediate evacuation. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Margaret agreed, and completely fair. Stay as long as you need. We have a guest room if you would rather not sleep on your ship. Well, 2 guest rooms, actually. We built with the assumption that we might eventually have visitors once people realize the dead zone is not quite as deadly as everyone thinks. Quillix made another choking sound. I was starting to recognize it as his default response to human logic. Over the next 3 days, I conducted the most thorough survey of my career. Every system, every component, every safety protocol, I examined it all with exhaustive detail. Quillix helped, though he spent most of his time muttering about impossible engineering and violations of accepted physics. And here is the thing that made me truly uncomfortable. Everything worked. The shielding held. The power systems generated stable energy from ambient radiation. The life support maintained perfect environmental conditions. The structural integrity showed no stress fractures or degradation. By every measurable metric, Haven Point was not just surviving in the dead zone, it was operating at peak efficiency. The humans had genuinely done it. They had looked at a region of space that the entire galaxy had written off as completely uninhabitable and said, that looks like a nice spot for a house. On the 3rd evening, I joined Thomas and Margaret for dinner. Actual cooked food made from their hydroponic vegetables and supplemented with supplies they had shipped in from human space. We sat at that same comfortable table, looking out at the particle storms through impossible windows, and they told me stories about Earth, about oceans that could swallow ships whole, about deserts that killed through heat and thirst, about mountains so high the air became too thin to breathe, about frozen wastelands and burning jungles, and every other hostile environment their planet offered, and about how humans had not just survived in these places, but had built cities, raised families, created entire civilizations in conditions that would challenge most spacefaring species. We are adaptation specialists, Thomas explained, refilling my glass with wine that he claimed came from a vineyard in a place called Tuscany. Give a human a problem and enough time, we will figure out how to live with it. It is what we do. It is who we are. The next morning, I transmitted my report to Brakthar. Complete technical documentation, safety verification, structural analysis, and my official recommendation that Haven Point be granted full residential permits with the caveat that the humans share their shielding technology with the broader galactic scientific community. Braktar's response came through 6 hours later, just 2 words. Of course it is. I think that summed up his feelings about humans fairly completely. Before we departed, Margaret gave me a small gift, a packet of tomato seeds from their hydroponics bay. For your own garden, she said with a smile. Wherever you end up. These are tough little things. They will grow almost anywhere if you give them half a chance. I accepted the seeds, though I had no idea if I would ever actually plant them. But I understood the gesture. The humans were not just building homes in impossible places. They were suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the rest of us had been too quick to write off the difficult locations. That with proper engineering and enough stubborn determination, nowhere was truly uninhabitable. As the persistent observer pulled away from Haven Point and began the journey back to civilized space, Quillix turned to me with a question. Senior Surveyor Vorthak, do you think there will be more humans building in extreme locations? I thought about Thomas and Margaret, living comfortably in their retirement paradise while particle storms raged outside. I thought about human history, constantly pushing into new frontiers despite every reasonable voice telling them to stop. I thought about those tomato seeds in my equipment bag. Yes, Quillix, I suspect there will be many more. And I suspect we are going to need to completely revise our definitions of what constitutes habitable space. The young Threxian was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he asked the question I had been avoiding thinking about. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I looked back at the sensor display, watching Haven Point signal fade as we put distance between ourselves and the dead zone. 2 elderly humans, growing tomatoes and drinking lemonade in the middle of cosmic chaos, completely content with their choices. I honestly have no idea, I admitted, but I suspect the galaxy is about to find out. 6 months passed after submitting my report on Haven Point, and I honestly thought that would be the end of my involvement with human residential choices. I was wrong, so incredibly wrong. Braktar summoned me to his office again, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. Something had gone horribly, predictably wrong involving humans and their complete disregard for sensible living arrangements. They are multiplying, Braktar said without preamble, gesturing at his display screen. I leaned forward to look at the data and felt my stomach sink. Not 1 habitat, not 2. 7. 7 separate human constructions had appeared in previously classified uninhabitable zones across 3 different sectors. Locations that we had marked as too dangerous for any form of settlement were now sporting human residential structures, agricultural facilities, and in one particularly baffling case, what appeared to be a recreational swimming facility. A swimming pool, I said slowly. They built a swimming pool in the sulfur wastes of Targon 5. Thermal springs, actually, Braktar corrected, looking like he wanted to throw his datapad across the room. According to their filed documentation, they are using the geothermal activity for heating and power generation while filtering out the toxic compounds for, and I quote, a relaxing spa experience. That region produces hydrogen sulfide gas that melts most hull plating. Yes, Vorthak, I am aware. I am also aware that this is now our problem because the Galactic Zoning Commission has decided that since we approved the Haven Point residents, we are apparently the experts on human extreme habitat authorization. I sat down without being invited because my legs suddenly did not want to support my weight anymore. They approved Haven Point? Based on your glowing technical assessment in the shielding data Thomas and Margaret provided, yes, which the humans have apparently interpreted as blanket permission to colonize every death trap in known space. Braktar pulled up more files, and I watched in growing horror as location after location appeared on screen. A habitat built inside an active asteroid field, using the constant bombardment for mineral collection. A station orbiting a pulsar, harvesting energy from radiation bursts that should liquefy organic tissue. A settlement on a planet with gravity 3 times galactic standard, where the humans claimed the high gravity was excellent for bone density and muscle development. They are treating hazard zones like prime real estate, I muttered. Worse than that, they are selling the idea to other humans. There is apparently a waiting list. A waiting list! 15,000 applications for extreme environment residences, according to Human Colonial Administration. They are calling it adventure living, frontier retirement. Some absolute lunatic has even proposed a tourism industry. I stared at Brakthar, searching for any indication he was joking. He was not. Tourism, I repeated, to places specifically designated as unsurvivable. The proposal includes guided tours of particle storms, recreational activities in variable gravity fields, and souvenir shops. Souvenir shops, Vorthak. This could not be happening. This was not how civilized species behaved. You did not look at a region of space marked with 17 different varieties of warning beacon and think, you know what would go great here? A gift shop. Except apparently humans did exactly that. What do they want from me? I asked, already dreading the answer. The Zoning Commission wants you to visit each location, verify safety standards, and provide recommendations for regulatory frameworks that account for human construction in extreme environments. Basically, they want you to figure out how to write rules for species that treat our danger zones like vacation destinations. That could take years. Then you better get started. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in the main plaza of something called Cascade Point, a human settlement built literally inside a stellar nursery where newborn stars were actively forming. The radiation levels should have been instantly fatal. The gravitational stresses should have torn apart anything larger than a molecule. The temperature fluctuations range from near absolute zero to hot enough to vaporize tungsten. And yet here was a thriving community of 200 humans, living in comfortable homes, growing food in protected biodomes, and apparently running a small business manufacturing specialized sensor equipment that could only be calibrated in these specific extreme conditions. A human named Rebecca gave me the tour, explaining cheerfully how they had adapted Thomas and Margaret's shielding designs for stellar environment applications. She showed me gardens growing under artificial sunlight because the real sunlight outside would flash fry anything biological. She introduced me to families who had moved here specifically because nowhere else in the galaxy offered this particular combination of scientific research opportunities and absolute isolation from civilized space traffic. "We like it here," Rebecca said simply. "It is quiet, beautiful in its own way, and the research possibilities are endless. Where else can you study star formation from literally inside the process?" Where else indeed? Probably nowhere, because every other species had the basic survival instinct to not build homes inside stellar nurseries. But as I toured Cascade Point, inspecting their safety systems and environmental controls, I kept coming back to the same uncomfortable realization I had experienced at Haven Point. Everything worked. The humans had not just thrown together some reckless construction and hoped for the best. They had engineered solutions to problems most species had not even attempted to solve. They had turned hostile environments into functioning habitats through nothing but stubborn determination and impressive technical skill. My tour of the other extreme settlements followed similar patterns. Each location presented unique challenges. Each human community had developed innovative solutions. And each time I found myself writing reports that essentially said the same thing. Yes, this is insane. Yes, it violates every standard assumption about habitable conditions. And yes, it works perfectly fine because humans apparently operate on different rules than the rest of the universe. The settlement in the asteroid field called Tumblestone Haven used the constant micro-impacts as both a defensive system and a resource-gathering operation. Automated collectors harvested minerals from fragments while the main habitat sat protected in the center of the densest cluster, safe behind shielding that redirected impacts away from critical structures. The station orbiting the pulsar, named Beacon's Edge, had developed energy collection systems so efficient they were selling surplus power to nearby colonies. The radiation that should have killed everyone aboard was being converted into usable energy at rates that made conventional power generation look primitive by comparison. Even the high-gravity world, designated simply as Ironhome, had become a medical research facility studying the long-term effects of variable gravity on human physiology. They were publishing papers that were revolutionizing our understanding of adaptive biology. Everywhere I went, I found humans thriving in places they should not survive. And more concerning, I found other species starting to pay attention. On my fifth site inspection at a facility built in a region of unstable space-time where reality itself occasionally glitched, I encountered something new: non-human residents. A Krellian physicist who had applied for permission to study the temporal anomalies firsthand, a Thexian engineer learning human shielding techniques, three Voltaxian researchers collaborating with the human inhabitants on projects that required the unique properties of fractured space-time. The humans were not just colonizing extreme environments, they were teaching others that these places could be colonized. They were sharing their technology, their methods, their complete disregard for conventional limitations. I realized, standing in that reality-distorted habitat, watching humans and aliens work together in conditions that should have been universally impossible, that something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had always divided space into habitable and uninhabitable zones. The humans had arrived and casually erased that distinction. When I returned to submit my final comprehensive report, Brakthar looked older somehow, tired, like someone who had spent months fighting against an inevitable conclusion and finally accepted defeat. "Tell me honestly, Vorthak," he said, "can we stop this?" I thought about Thomas and Margaret in their dead zone retirement home, about Rebecca studying star formation from inside a stellar nursery, about all the humans I had met who had looked at impossible places and simply decided to live there anyway. "No," I said, "I do not think we can. More importantly, I am not sure we should." "Explain." "The humans are expanding the boundaries of what we consider possible. They are developing technologies that benefit everyone, and they are doing it safely, despite how insane it looks from the outside. Every settlement I visited had better safety records than most conventional habitats. Zero fatalities, minimal injuries, perfect environmental stability. Because they over-engineer everything," Brakthar muttered. "Exactly. They assume the worst possible scenarios and build systems to handle 3 times that. It makes their construction expensive and time-consuming, but it also makes them nearly indestructible." Brakthar was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up a file I had not seen before. Applications. Hundreds of applications from non-human species requesting permission to build in extreme environments using human techniques. "This is what worries me," he said. "Not the humans. They have proven they can handle it. But what happens when everyone else starts trying to copy them without understanding the engineering requirements?" That was a legitimate concern. The difference between human extreme habitat construction and disaster was attention to detail that most species might skip in favor of faster, cheaper building. "Then we established standards," I said. "Real standards based on human methods. Mandatory safety requirements. Engineering certification programs. We turn this from chaos into regulated expansion. You want to legitimize living in death traps. I want to acknowledge that they are not death traps if you build them correctly. The humans have proven that. Now we need to make sure everyone else learns to do it right." 6 months later, the Galactic Zoning Commission published new guidelines for extreme environment habitation, based primarily on human engineering standards, requiring triple redundant safety systems, comprehensive shielding, constant environmental monitoring. Expensive, complicated, but proven effective. Applications for extreme zone construction permits increased by 400% in the first month. I visited Haven Point one final time to personally deliver Thomas and Margaret their official residential certification. We sat at that familiar table, drinking lemonade, looking out at particle storms that no longer seemed quite as terrifying. "You started something," I told them. "The entire galaxy is rethinking what is possible because you two wanted a house with a view." Margaret smiled. "We just wanted somewhere quiet to retire. Everything else was just solving problems as they came up. You made the impossible look easy." "Nothing is impossible," Thomas said. "Just expensive, complicated, and requiring more effort than most people want to invest. But if you really want something, you figure it out." Flying back to my office, I thought about those words, about human nature and their absolute refusal to accept limitations, about how they had looked at the dead zone and seen opportunity instead of danger. The galaxy was changing. Borders were expanding. Places we had written off forever were becoming new frontiers, and it was all because 2 retired astrophysicists had decided the most dangerous region of known space would be a nice place to grow tomatoes. I still had those seeds Margaret gave me. Maybe I thought it was time to plant them. After all, if humans could make gardens bloom in the dead zone, surely I could manage a few tomatoes in normal space. The universe was full of impossible things. The humans had taught us that impossible just meant nobody had tried hard enough yet. And somehow, against all reasonable expectations, that was actually a comforting thought. Before we jump into the chaos, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next adventure.
This is Amir and you are watching HFY Protocol.